All right, let's just spend a little bit of time talking about the religion of Islam and how it develops and where it develops and that story, and then how it expands and how it spreads. Islam develops in the Arabian Peninsula, modern-day Saudi Arabia, and its central figure is a man by the name of Muhammad. Muhammad was born in 570 in Mecca and lives till 632 A.D. At a very young age, Muhammad loses both his parents at the age of about 6, and he's taken in by an uncle who was a pretty successful caravan trader merchant in Mecca. And he goes ahead and is raised in basically the family business and begins leading caravans across the Arabian desert to places like Damascus, to places like Jerusalem. And there he encounters various different religions that were monotheistic, i.e., particularly Judaism and Christianity. And he goes ahead and has this interest in these. And as he gets older, he ends up marrying a wealthy widow by the name of Khadijah. And one of the things she's attracted to about Muhammad is this interest he has in religion. And so she encourages it. And somewhere around the year 610, when he was about 40 years old, he was going ahead and following this interest at his wife's encouragement. And as the story goes, he was out in the desert meditating in a cave, and he meets the angel Gabriel. And he is taken across the desert and to Jerusalem, and where he's raised up into heaven, and he receives a divine revelation, which is later turned into the Quran. What is the Quran? Well, the Quran is basically the holy book of Islam, and it basically outlines all of the beliefs that Muslims hold. A Muslim, somebody who follows the religion of Islam. It's divided into 114 surahs, or chapters. Surah, another or Arabic for section. And chapters, and so basically arranged from longest to shortest. Your longest surahs are at the very beginning, and your shortest surahs are towards the end. But it's really not the only thing that you really need to understand Islam. If you were to read the Quran by itself, it's somewhat disjointed because it's not arranged chronologically, so you don't know what's happening when, and you don't know the circumstances that it was written around. In order to understand that, you really need two other documents which are fundamental for understanding Islam. You need Hadith, which is not really a book like the Quran is a book. Hadith is a collection of writings, and they're customs and traditions and sayings of Muhammad. And so you point back to this, and these are things that he taught, and this is where a lot of your Islamic interpretation of law and different things comes into effect. It's the Hadith. And then the last thing, the Sirah, which is really the biography of Muhammad. And so these documents, Hadith and the Sirah, help to explain what's going on in these different chapters or different surahs of the Quran. And so really their beliefs are kind of summed up and understood best when taking into account these three different documents. The Quran, which is the holy book, the revelation from God. Hadith, a collection of traditions and sayings and customs that Muhammad proposes and encourages. And then the Sirah, which is basically the biography of Muhammad. The 5 pillars then of Islam are your 5 basic beliefs of the religion. And the 5 pillars, simply put, pray 5 times a day, and you're supposed to be facing towards Mecca when you do that. Mecca being the most holy city in Islam. You're supposed to fast during the month of Ramadan. That's in honor of the flight from Mecca to Medina, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. You're supposed to have charity to the poor. You're supposed to confess that there is only one God and that Muhammad is his prophet. And then once in your life, you're supposed to try to go on the Hajj. The Hajj is just a pilgrimage to Mecca that every Muslim is supposed to take if they are able. All of these things are things that are meditated on and things that are thought about. The prayers take place in what's called a mosque. A mosque is basically the holy building, a holy site, a place of worship, a church, if you will, for Muslims. And the person who is usually kind of instrumental in making that all go, the cleric, if you will, the priest, the preacher. In Islam, that person is called an imam. The imam is the prayer leader, a spiritual leader, and certainly not the only one, but imams are usually highly revered. Another concept that you find in Islam is the concept of jihad, or holy war. Oftentimes it's translated as holy war. And there's different ways of understanding that. Throughout the history of Islam, the way somebody who was outside of Islam would understand that is probably actually in a literal sense in an actual war, the war of expansion. And certainly Islam expands very rapidly through conquest in the 100 years or so following Muhammad's death. Within the community of Islam, it might be understood as the struggle against sinfulness and the struggle to do right. And so there's different concepts there, again, depending on whether you're a Muslim, whether you're a kafir, which is a non-Muslim outside, it's probably going to change your understanding of what exactly jihad is. Somebody who's outside the Muslim community would understand jihad probably very differently than somebody who lives inside the Muslim community. So how does Islam spread? Well, again, it begins in Mecca. Muhammad goes ahead and says, hey, I'm the prophet, and there's only one God, and it's Allah. And the Meccans view this as a threat, because Mecca was a place for pilgrimage, where Arabs from all over the peninsula would come to worship their gods. Arabs were polytheists. And so the Meccans don't like what Muhammad is saying, and they want to get rid of him. And so they persecute him, they plot to kill him, but Muhammad flees Mecca and goes to the city of Yathrib. Yathrib today is called Medina, which literally means city of the prophet. And there he goes ahead and really begins to establish himself as not only a religious leader, not only as a prophet, but as a political leader. Most notably, probably in the Battle of the Trench, he goes ahead and defends the Muslim community there in Medina against aggressors from Mecca, and also against, there were 3 tribes of Jewish tribes that lived in Yathrib, which is one of the reasons they probably initially accepted him, because they were monotheists like he was. But 2 of the tribes, at least, if not a third, side with the Meccans to try to go ahead and get rid of Muhammad. And the Muslims win that battle, and that's really the beginning for Muhammad. He will go ahead from there and he will grow in strength. They will raid the Meccan caravans. They will eventually show up to Mecca with a fairly large force. He'll go ahead and conquer Mecca, and from there he'll go ahead and move out. And by the time he dies in 632, he had really conquered a good chunk of the Arabian Peninsula. For the most part, Islam had become the dominant religion in the Arabian Peninsula, and this all takes place in the course of about 22 years. And so he dies, and the next guy who takes over is a guy by the name of Abu Bakr. He calls himself a caliph, or the successor to the prophet. And there's 4 caliphs that follow up immediately following the death of Muhammad. Abu Bakr, who was only caliph for 2 years, Umar, Uthman, and then Ali. They're called the rightly guided caliphs. And this is kind of like the euphoric first years after the founding. And so this is kind of remembered as a very ideal time in Islamic history. This is when a ton of expansion takes place. Abu Bakr, who was Muhammad's father-in-law, but also a contemporary of Muhammad, so not really that much older than Muhammad, very very close in age. But Muhammad was married to his daughter Aisha, and he goes ahead and expands in the 2 years that he's the caliph. And then the next guy who really expands Islam is Umar. He goes ahead and conquers the Persians. He moves into Jerusalem in 637. He goes into Alexandria and Egypt, conquers those. And those were all formerly Christian lands controlled by the Byzantines. And he comes up with what's called the Pact of Umar. How do you deal with all these folks? And we'll talk more about that probably at a later date. Umar himself then is assassinated. And then Uthman takes over. Uthman rules for about 12 years. And then himself is assassinated, and then finally Ali becomes the last. Ali is actually Muhammad's son-in-law. He was married to Muhammad's daughter Fatima, and he then also is assassinated in what would be modern-day Najaf in Iraq. And from there, that's where you end up with an Islamic civil war, and you have the division of Sunni and Shia Muslims after the assassination of Ali. It was originally a political division: who should be caliph. The Shias thought Ali should be, and the Sunnis thought somebody else should be. And then they will go ahead and expand rapidly. Again, Muhammad dies in 632. By 100 years later, in 732, the Muslims had conquered all the way into India, up to the Indus River Valley, and then all the way across northern Africa, all of northern Africa, and into Spain. And in 732, they reach kind of the peak of their expansion into Europe. In 732, they're defeated at the Battle of Tours or Poitiers, and basically in central France. So in 100 years, they go ahead and go through the entire Middle East. The Persian Empire is conquered. The Indus River Valley, at least nominally, is under their control. All of northern Africa, Egypt, and really all of Spain. So again, following the death of Ali, you get the rise of the Umayyad dynasty, and they go ahead and last for about 150 years. Then they're kicked out. Their capital's at Damascus. Then you have the Abbasids. The Abbasids, that's kind of referred to as the golden age of Islam. They go ahead and rule from Baghdad, and eventually they go ahead and fade. And then the Ottoman Empire comes along. In India, you have a different group. You have the Delhi Sultans, who established power in the northern part of India out of their capital, Delhi, as the name would suggest. You have Timur, who comes out of really Central Asia, modern-day Uzbekistan, also at least nominally Muslim, but he certainly conquers India. He conquers really the Ottomans as well. He plunders Baghdad. He definitely didn't mind attacking non-Muslims and Muslims and conquered a huge empire. And then the Mughal Empire also it becomes one of the first becomes really the first empire to unite all of India. And the Mughal Empire again primarily a Muslim empire there in India as well. The cultural achievements of Islam are significant. One of the big ones in the city of Baghdad, you have the House of Wisdom, which was a university, a place where wisdom and knowledge was collected from all over the Muslim world. You get the development of something called the Canon of Medicine, which is basically an encyclopedia developed by Ibn Sina. And he goes ahead and collects medical information from the Islamic world and from Greece and the Roman world, and combines it into this document, which is basically a collection of the medical knowledge of the day. Significant developments in math and sciences, especially things like astronomy and geography. The Astrolabe is a device that really helps sailors navigate the ocean so they can tell how far north and south they are of the equator, so their latitude. In mathematics, the development of algebra. Algebra, in fact, developed from an Islamic name. And so, again, huge developments in those fields on the part of Islam.